Yeah, through the
Exactly.
That sounds good to me. Yeah.
And that would be not too threshold.
I'd be in favor of that.
To go along.
All right, I'll call the meeting to order. Or I should say call the meeting back to order. Just came out of executive session. Kick it off to you, Dr. Maher, for the Facilities Task Force update.
Okay, thank you. Well, here we are, June 6th in the afternoon. This morning I had the privilege of meeting with all of the district administrators and kind of talking about where we have come through this last year. And when I think about that, one of the things that we've been working on for all of that year is a facility study. The facility study right now is kind of coming to the end, coming to the finished product, or getting nearly to that finished product. And sometimes I think it makes sense to go back and say, where did we come from with this? How long ago did we start this process? I think we started this process through the strategic planning process, specifically priority area 4 on community engagement, where we start talking about facilities and engaging the community on the process for improving our facilities. So that's a couple of years ago. When you think about formalizing the study that we're just completing right now, if you'll think back to August of 2017 at our board retreat in this room, we unveiled the timeline of events and topics that would be within that study over the past year. So we started that in August of 2017, and if this concludes with a bond issue in September of 2018, and you're inclusive of August 2017 and September 2018, that's 14 months that we will have traveled that journey. And it's actually quite a bit longer than that when you include in that the development of the strategic plan and seeing the need for this process. So part of what I'm saying is you've done a lot of work in the last year. A lot of people have done a lot of work in the last year. And we're, like we've been many times, we're at the end of one phase and the beginning of another phase. So the phase that we're ending is the work of the task force. We commissioned a group of 30 community people to give you a cross-section of the community and to give you an unvarnished look at what our needs were, and then ask that group to bring you some recommendations. Well, they're ready to do that today. I would just be mindful and reminding you of, well, then what? What's next? We've got this task force doing their work. We don't have to do anything. Oh, not so fast. There's a survey that's going out Monday, June 11th, and it'll be out for 2 weeks. Before our next work session, or at our next work session, you'll have that information in addition to the recommendations that you'll be getting from the task force today and formally Monday night at the board meeting. And one of the things I would remind you of, ultimately, the scope that we'll put together, that's your work. That's your job. You've got a lot of information from the community. You're going to get recommendations from a task force. You're going to get more information from a survey. I suspect from time to time you're hearing about this topic in the community. You're probably getting plenty of feedback on that. The one thing I would tell you is you're right on target. When I think back to last August and the events that we outlined, you're right on target. You're right on task. You're right where you need to be. Ultimately, you need to put a scope together. You need to form that up. I think the task force has gone a long way in taking that moldable clay and put that together, but you get to put the detail to it. That's your responsibility before ultimately we go back to the ultimate in community engagement, and that is a community vote. So with that, I'll kick this over to Joe Donovan and ask Joe to give the update on the report and the work of the task force.
Thank you. And I am going to be joined by Nan and Vernon.
I thought that, I just didn't want to be
Yep.
so presumptuous.
How are you? And I'll start just by thanking the board once again for the opportunity to work in the district. And this has been a lot of work for you, and I just want to thank you for all that you've put in. Again, as Dr. Maher mentioned, this has been an effort that has been continuing over some time. We began the engagement effort with some engagement sessions. Many of you were at those engagement sessions. We were challenged a little bit by the weather, but we were able to have 3 sessions where we went to the community. Community members turned out in numbers that I thought was very impressive, provided some information to the community and asked them some questions. That information then was provided to, again, the 30-person task force. I'm joined again by Nan Baker, and Vernon Brown. Sorry about that. I mess that up every single time. Vernon and Nan, I'm joined by our co-chairs. And again, I'll just say that as co-chairs, we put a ton of work into this, and I'm just very grateful for all of the work that they did. As you know, we held 4 task force meetings with 30 members of the community. A really terrific, broad cross-section of your community came together in this room and went through, again, with a process, evaluated the needs of the district, used a lot of data, used the information that was provided by those engagement sessions, and ultimately came up with the report that we have today. So what I thought that I would do is just continue and just do maybe a 30,000-foot overview of the sections of the report, and then I'd like to turn things over to co-chairs who can provide some greater detail. Do you have, has this been handed out? Do you have this already? Okay. Maybe I'll, there you go. Oh, good. Okay. All right. I'll note that this has been, you'll see at the top, this is version 1.9, so we're on our 9th version of this. In reality, there haven't been many changes made over the last several revisions, but I will tell you that this is an as yet unedited, unproofed document, and we continue to find a few little things. Our next step will be to proof and edit the document. You'll notice that we start with a letter from the task force. In that, they made clear that they wanted both to thank the district staff, and I should also mention, just a ton of work done by district staff in putting this together. In addition to doing all of the other things that happen at the end of the year, your district staff did a tremendous amount of work. Provided an executive summary. Introduction, where we provide a little bit of background information about the district, followed by facility needs. This, I should note, is kind of a challenge, and I think that your task force members would tell you this, that there's so much information that they have as task force members. It's a challenge sometimes to distill this down in such a way that we can present this quickly, but we really thought that in putting together this report that it was important that we had kind of a standalone document so that someone who maybe wasn't engaged, a community member who didn't participate in this, could pick up this report and could understand what had taken place. After that, we provided the process. Again, you've been very engaged in that. We provided a little bit of background on each of the 4 meetings. Again, we moved very, very quickly in working through this process. And then on page 8, we thought that it was important that we provided you with some, and community members with some information about the dialogue that took place at the meetings. Covered a lot of ground and really jumped in with both feet and did a tremendous amount of work, really great conversations about what this district, how this district can meet the needs that have been presented, both now and looking forward into the future. And with that, based on that, you'll see that there are some bulleted recommendations. The recommendations, again, are consistent. They fall within the parameters of the charge that you gave this task force. And then we have a few addendum items, including the charge that you provided, of course, the names of the participants, and some additional information. One of the kind of cool things is one of the members of the task force, Theron, provided a word cloud of all of the information that was gathered at the engagement session. Not only is this good and useful, this must have taken just a ton of time to do, and it really shows the commitment of task force members as they came together to do this. So again, that's kind of a high-level overview of how this report came to be and the work of the task force following the engagement sessions. And with that, I'll turn things over to our co-chairs, and you can provide a little more detail.
First of all, and I think you as board members know this, but you have incredible staff. They were so on top of this, and I've had the opportunity to work in other governments, as you know, and your team is very strong. So thank you for providing them for the guidance. This wouldn't have happened without them or without Joe. Most of you attended part or all of the meetings. I also want to acknowledge two members that are here today, Dina Barth, who is a former colleague of some of you, and Theron McChesney, who's on the task force as well, are here today. I don't have a whole lot to add, but if you'd like to ask us questions or embrace in a discussion, we're happy to do that.
I think Vernon had a good summary on how we both feel as a result of the process that was put together. It was very thoughtfully put together. I would say what sticks out in my mind, first and foremost, was the community engagement that took place, and that our task force really took that to heart, and how we came up with some solutions to our growing enrollment and what that means for our facilities. So,
I think I'm most pleased with the financial result. The fact that the average property taxpayer would only see a $2 a month increase under the scenario that of all the facility needs that the district provided. I think that's really remarkable. I think that's a very reasonable request, and you will take criticism for it. We all do in government when we have to increase taxes, but that's part of leadership. And you guys are a good leadership team, and I know that you'll provide the answers to the community to make it successful.
Thank you. Do we just want to open it up to discussion? No. Okay.
I would recommend that you maybe look at the big rocks in here and say, what is the task force saying? The task force is saying middle school, high school, elementary school. Then what else? What's that prioritized list look like? I'm just thinking from a board perspective, as you continue to form that mound of clay, if you will, I think that's important for you to understand that, to question that, to confirm that, or also look at the prioritized list, and look at the funding stream. And today's the day just to really, I think, ask a lot of questions. It might still look like there's a lot of time between now and September, but I would remind you that if you're going to run a bond issue in September, you're going to call for it by July 23rd. If you're going to call for it by July 23rd, you got to be really clear on the scope between now and then. So I think it's time to ask questions
and I would like to provide some framework to which our task force used, and that was number one, we looked at student achievement as well as teacher job satisfaction. And in looking at that, we came up with a ratio for one teacher to 24.3 students, and that helps set the stage for a population per facility of, at the elementary level, 600, middle school, 1,000, and high school, 1,600, or 1,800, excuse me, 1,800. And so we used that as a framework when we looked at what the growing enrollment looks like over the next 10 years, and then what we would need for facilities. So,
on the population in the schools, the task force was very clear. But they do not want the enrollments larger in those buildings because of that student achievement and teacher satisfaction, but just the sense of community that a building might have. They were very clear on that.
And you can probably see that as well in the word cloud.
Yeah.
I think the other exciting piece, one of the big rocks, is the commitment to Whittier. There was a lot of discussion about Whittier and wanting to make sure that an attendance site, a middle school, remained in that neighborhood, and committing to purchase land in that area for a rebuild when that building has seen its full use achieved. And I was excited about that. Having a role in the past in city government, that neighborhood is critical, and we need to make sure that we continue to invest in it. And so I was pleased with the discussion that the task force had about it. At moments, a little tense, but all for the same goal. Everyone at the table wanted to see that neighborhood maintained and improved with a new school in the future.
Just a question, I guess, on the Whittier piece. And I know that what the task force task was is to address the enrollment issue and the crowding that exists. And that's a concern for me, has been for quite a while. And the Whittier Middle School, and I understand that a replacement for Whittier needs to be a little bit, I need to be a little bit patient with that so that we get the property purchased at a reasonable price. But I also want to make sure, as you said, Vernon, that we do right by the students in that neighborhood. And the $190 million that we have for a total dollar amount, the $2 a month for an average home and increase in property tax, those are all things that I am 100% on board with. I just want to make sure that 10 years from now, when I'm probably no longer on the board, somebody doesn't say, what were they thinking by not moving forward quicker on the Whittier project?
Those are great questions, and I think a couple factors went into that. One, you mentioned it, the time it'll take to acquire the land. Your staff indicated it'd probably be 6 years to acquire the necessary land for that property. And another piece of it, I would say, is the task force also recommended that you really do the task force every 5 years. And I think that's why we wanted to make sure the language was strong in this. So the next task force, one of their first assignments, I'm sure, will be to pick up this document and see that commitment that they'll need to then take the ball and carry it to the goal to get Whittier as the #1 priority in the next phase.
Right. And at this point, if we replaced Whittier, it would not allow us to address the growing enrollment issue. We need a new middle school, and just replacing Whittier alone would not allow us to address that issue.
I agree it needs to stay there. I just have the same concerns about how long it's going to take and what will we face over the next 5 to 10 years with that. It's just a little bit of a concern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that was a concern echoed in the discussions with the task force.
One advantage too, maybe, if you think 5 years out and we do a similar exercise, we're going to be 5 years smarter on our enrollment and to know, to make sure we build that building the right size and to accommodate the needs that we have in the district at that point too. There are some advantages there. But I would echo, just as an observer, a very interested observer, but as an observer, what Vernon said about the real commitment that the task force talked about to the core of our community. Whittier took a lot of conversation, but it was even beyond Whittier when we talk about Lowell, when we talk about Cleveland, and we talk about Hawthorne. But there was a real commitment to keeping our core very strong.
Horseman.
I was also worried about Whittier and wondering if we're not doing it soon enough. And speaking with other board members and some administration, I think we can actually make this a win-win, because we can look at, we're going to be losing maybe some of affordable housing in that neighborhood, and how are we going to, as a community, address that? And talking to some staff, we have a lot at Lincoln Elementary, maybe we could look at partnering with the city in some affordable housing and develop that plan as we're losing the homes in the Whittier neighborhood to kind of win for the situation of the community. So,
As long as you're talking about housing, I've always had a hope that someday we as a district could find ways to put affordable housing in the core, some sort of partnership with the school district and other housing partners, because the research I've read says that teachers that live near the school in which they teach are more vested in that school, and it's better for the kids in the neighborhood. And that was outside the scope of this task force, but since we're talking about housing, I think that would be a great opportunity to explore.
yeah, and I can't take all credit. Also, that's one of the, but we both have been concerned about this. So I think that could be a win-win for everything.
The community gardens that are at Lincoln, hopefully we can find a place to move those so that we aren't displacing people's want to do that. But it just seems to me that we've got a block of land that we could look at with a development partner of some sort, probably the city, on affordable housing, to replace some of those 22 houses that we would acquire over time for the Whittier project.
When I was on the city council, I received more emails on that property of the old Lincoln Elementary than most any other issue, people wondering what the future was of that property and how the school district might use it. Anytime someone was buying a house in that neighborhood, somehow I'd get an email, people asking, what's going on there? Before I buy the property, I want to know what might go there in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Another piece that I went to all of the engagement sessions. I was able to work my schedule to be able to be at each of them. And I know that you had quite a bit of discussion with the task force, particularly on the very generous offer that Sanford has made for the land in that area near the Sanford Sports Complex. But I also read and listened carefully that the task force was very clear that we need to consider that generous offer and give it our due diligence. However, if the determination is that that is not the ideal spot, we need to try and make sure that whatever it is that we do, since we're looking, if you look at Whittier being nearly 100 years old, the decision that we make is one that's going to outlive all of us, and that we aren't necessarily obligated to purely look at the piece of land that Sanford has so generously offered. Do I understand
that's
that?
correct, and
Okay.
that was certainly how we captured that particular session of the dialogue as it pertains to that piece of land.
But
No
so
building
the
you
need to
build
be-
is more expensive than a high school, and so, yeah, I think that was recognized.
Saw the need for it to be a northwest, but not specifically that piece of property, so there might be a challenge in finding a hunk of land. We don't take that gift.
And having Mike Cooper and Mark Cotter on the task force, knowing where infrastructure exists, where we can go reasonably to, obviously a high school, a middle school, there are infrastructure issues that need to be considered, and that continuing partnership with the city is extremely important to make sure that we don't overtax the infrastructure and put it in the right spot.
Yeah, infrastructure and residential growth.
Right.
I had a opportunity to talk to both Mike and Mark last week, and they were so thankful of how the district involved them in the process. They were really pleased to be a part of it, and I know there'll be great assets moving forward too as you decide where these facilities will go. Thank you.
The other important piece that isn't a decision we're making today, but I took from that is we need to be very cognizant and have community input when we go to redistrict our schools. And I think all of us agree we will want the input, we will take the input, we will open that up because it's a big decision for our district and it's going to affect every school in our district.
I think Nan and I got the easier task force. When you redraw the boundaries, that's going to be, that we know there's a history of that being challenging in this community and many others. But as you'll see in the report as well, that we did it with the assumption that you have to redraw the boundaries if you're going to make the investment in the buildings. The community needs to understand that has to happen to equalize and make sure we're not overcrowding schools beyond those capacities we discussed.
So kind of to that point, do you guys want to just talk briefly or summarize the conversations from the meetings about, okay, we're saying we have way too many students on the west side of Sioux Falls, so let's build something on the east side, and how there were some community members on that panel that struggled with that thought. So do you guys want to just kind of summarize that for us too?
Yeah. The visual that was provided to us by Mike Cooper was that from Mike or from the district?
Might have been
I
the
wonder if
district
they all
maps.
have this. If you may have
I got
this.
it up
Okay. So we just thought of it and looked at it in terms of north-south, and that we would make the piece, or whoever is going to be up to that charge would look north-south and look to making each piece of the pie maybe more narrow than what it is now, so that there would become a shift, and the slice of the it's not really going to be a pie, but the square would be more narrow on the end that has the overcrowding right now, and thus a wider a slice on the east end. So that was sort of the rationale.
And geographically, think of on the west side, you have 2 middle schools already, but McGovern is not at capacity. And that's going to come down to redrawing boundaries and equalizing that. Your farthest east middle school is Whittier. And much of the growth is Mike Cooper. Whittier is farther east than Patrick. And much of the growth that we'll see in future populations is going to be in that southeast quadrant.
The more immediate growth, long-term growth will be in the northeast, or no, it'd be the, northwest, and then the southeast will have more of the short-term growth, residential growth.
If you'll allow me, if I can try to paint this mental picture for you, if you look at our district as a square, I think you said, Nan, if you think of it as a square and you divide that square into thirds, and you think west to east, in the western third of our district map, there are 2 middle schools. And in the central third, there are 3 middle schools. And in the eastern third, there are no middle schools. So if you didn't pay any attention to where the distribution of students is right now, and you just put buildings in a place where it made sense geographically, you would certainly put one in the eastern side. But it's not intuitive to say, how does that solve our problem? We've done such a good job of telling the community Memorial Middle School is the 6th largest school in the state of South Dakota, regardless of grade configuration, and it is. So how do we build a building on the east side to solve that problem? We redo boundaries. We also think about where the future growth is, and Mark Cotter and Mike Cooper did a great job of saying northwest and southeast. So building that middle school in the east really makes sense if you take a little time and think through it, and not think solely about Memorial Middle School and the overcrowding that is there. I also like to remind people that while Memorial Middle School is our most pronounced overcrowding school, it is not our only school that is at or over capacity. Of our 5 middle schools, 4 of them are at or over capacity. So this isn't just a Memorial Middle School issue that we're solving.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Maher, but McGovern also has room to be a larger school and still be within that 1,000 students someday with some building additions, right, Jeff?
Correct.
So there's capacity to grow the space there on the west side in the
And there,
future.
yeah, there's also land capacity as facility needs are looked at.
Correct.
I loved having this ratio because when we go forward with the bond, you know, this isn't our money, it's not the task force money, it's the people's money of, you know, the Sioux Falls School District. And we can all decide what size school we want, but the people who are voting and paying for it need to be comfortable with it too. And so in getting this number, and when we get our community surveys, it will be helpful in us going forward to know what people are comfortable with in going forward with that number. Because what is too big? What is too small? What is the right use of our money to do this? And the other thing I mentioned, I think, when we had the students who came and spoke to us is that, you know, we live in a bubble of Sioux Falls, and when we get these bigger schools, we don't think of it. But at some point, we're going to be like Washington in the 1960s or 50s when they had to go way out of state to go compete with other teams because we're so much bigger than any other school in our region. And do we want to do that, or do we want to be a member of South Dakota as a school district? So I appreciate these numbers because it's very helpful in me in deciding on that.
You know, one other point that we touched on when we were deciding the building capacities that I hadn't given much thought to, but it came up, was the competition to be in extracurricular activities too. You get over, I mean, 1,800 in South Dakota is a lot of students. But you get over that, it makes it all that much more difficult for students to be participating in activities that really draw them into the academics as well.
Very true.
Any other thoughts?
Well,
Questions?
a question. We do have some members of the public here, and I realize that the changes in state law for public input don't technically happen until the 1st of July. Should we invite some input from the folks that are here from the public
And other task force members?
Ken pretty much already invited them. So
thought it was a good time?
I'd like to ask a question about the handout specifically. My name is Michael Wyland. I live here in Sioux Falls.
Michael, why don't we get you a microphone?
Where would you like?
I think right there's fine, or anywhere up here is fine.
Sure, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Maybe I should ask Ben. Ben, are we okay?
It's fine.
You're good.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Michael Wyland. I live here in Sioux Falls. I just had a question about the report handout that was given to those of us in the audience. The last page of the report, there is a reference to a task force survey. I was just curious about who received that survey or how that survey was done. And I guess the second question was, of the recommendations or the prioritized ranking here, a new high school was not listed among the priorities. And so I was curious to know how the ranking was done and who was asked. Thank you.
So, thank you for that, and I should have clarified that, and that certainly is different than the community survey that we're working on. And, so what this was is this was just looking at prioritizing some needs of the district. It was a short survey that was done just to task force members in an effort to, when we came into the next meeting, not have to go through the exercise of trying to prioritize these items. So it was addressing, and I think that this is safe. I'm looking at Jeff to make sure. This was not a survey to address enrollment growth, but really to assess the needs of the district. Is that correct?
I think the task force already had said high school, middle school, and elementary. These were those miscellaneous projects that were listed that we went through the prior meetings.
And I think it was also used to come up with, when they were going to recommend an amount, I think there were people on the committee, the task force, who said, I don't know what a good amount is. What are we getting for our money? And so there was a list of projects that said, these are the other things, if we had the money, we'd sure like to do. And then in an effort to say, okay, let's pretend we have the money, what would we do first? And what would we do second? And so that's, I think, where you started to say, okay, well, what if we asked for X amount of money? Then we wouldn't do these last 7 on the list. But as you, I think, mentioned, that was already including a high school, a middle school, and an elementary.
I think we quickly, go ahead, Ann.
And then we asked Mr. Carter if we could have those items that would not be part of the bond issue put into the capital outlay plan, because we know that those are critical to continuing to meet the needs of the district in terms of the facilities.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
You bet. Sure, but-
Anybody else?
Theron, Dina, what did we miss?
Maybe just a comment on
Maybe just a point of clarification on the word cloud, what that represents. So from the 3 public sessions where there was feedback coming in through those the questions that were asked at those community sessions, the process was I went ahead and typed up all the responses. Some of them were a little bit illegible, did the best we could in terms of identifying that language. And then because there were so many words and the categories got so broad, I recategorized those into what was represented and then selected, in this case, the one that's represented in the report, the top, I think it was top 40. It looks like top 40 response categories. So in terms of pure word cloud versus categorization of the words.
Dina? Yes. I know Dina is young, but she was our historian.
I'm not that young. When I look at I got to be a kindergarten teacher at a much older age, and now my kindergartners are in their high 20s, so I'm not that young, but thank you for the compliment. Jeff Hubert was our historian. As a teacher and a committed member to this community, he really understood the depth of what students and staff needed, so it was wonderful to partner along with Jeff to have that perspective at the table. I think you captured it all well. There's a lot of information, and Joe did a marvelous job. As many people at the table said, they were grateful for the community engagement part, our part of the refinement of that community engagement, and now what we can do to move forward. It also, I think, ignited a lot of the task force members to want to be involved deeper and more. You all know, as I know, you pass budgets and you do major work and there's no one in the audience. This enlightened them that you all need them to stand up and be present. So thank you for opening those floodgates. I hope you're ready for them.
Any other community members?
I just noticed, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I just noticed on the list of here, it says that there were 14 projects, but there's only 13 listed. Is there something missing, or were there only 13?
This would be the last.
Yeah, flipped off, so it was number 14. I'll add that. Thank you for that. Yeah, I clipped that.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay.
Do you have any, we've talked a lot about the facilities, the brick and mortar. We've talked quite a little bit about the location. Do you have any comments or any research or anything you want us to do or any explanation needed on any of the financing? We know from a big picture perspective, there's $190 million there. But I think all of us say, what does that mean to me? Do you want to have any conversation about how the numbers were taken into account? I'm not trying to make this meeting longer.
No, I think it would be
I just want to make
good.
sure you
It
have
would-
an opportunity to go through
Yeah.
everything and that people have an opportunity here to.
Yeah, I mean, Todd, if you want to.
Sure.
go a little bit more in depth?
Yeah, the plan is to probably let, well, first of all, I should say, we're going to do we plan to do a RFP for a financial advisor that would be approved if we're going to go forward with the bond eventually in July by the school board. So that RFP will probably be going out very early next week, just an FYI, and you'll see a recommendation then in early July. But so our preliminary plan, without having the financial advisor on board yet, is to use kind of the technique they did in 1997 when they did I think it was a $31 million bond, and the district said, we're going to lower our capital outlay levy and to offset the cost of the bond so that your levy essentially wouldn't go up. And that they promised or made a commitment for 5 years that they would honor that commitment. So, because they had a 5-year plan. Now this is a 10-year plan, this one. So that was a 5-year plan. They made a 5-year commitment. And I think as I told, so you guys get to hear this again, as I told the task force, I wasn't here in 97. I was here in 92, right at the end of that commitment. And we were honoring it then. The school board was at that time. And Kent for sure was on the school board. And many of you guys were. We honored it all the way out until those bonds were retired. That a commitment that was made. So it was a 5-year commitment. It stuck around for about 20 years before those bonds ended up getting retired, and we defeased them early. And then, so going back to that level of thinking, and then we had talked very early on with the task force that we used to have a $3 capital outlay levy. All school districts did in the state. And the legislature in 2016 kind of to combat rapidly rising agricultural values in agriculturally predominant, I should say, school districts, and what their levies were going, or their capital outlay dollar amounts were going up double digits that they were able to raise. They kind of did a one-size-fits-all, applied it to all school districts, and so our levy has slipped from $3 down to $2.87, and it will continue to decline. So we said if we recaptured that 13 cents, and between the two, the bond and the capital outlay levy, we would be at 3, where we were prior to that new law taking effect. We can manage that and do a 10-year commitment to hold at that $3 amount. And so that was kind of the plan we came up with. What it would look like in the first year of a bond, you're usually only paying interest, and we already have that capital, so that would just be a 13-cent levy on the bond. But in the full year where you're making principal payments and interest payments, it would look like a about 88-cent bond levy is what we're projecting, and then we would lower the capital outlay levy to $2.12 to be at that $3 amount. The first year we plan to be at $2.87 and 13 cents, but that's because we just we'll build in a partial payment on that first year of the bond. So that's how it works, and then over time we just stay at that $3 levy between the two, and as valuations rise, the bond levy will drop a little, and the capital outlay levy will creep up a little, just like what we did with the 1997 bond.
Todd, I remember in the last meeting someone asked you, I thought it was a good question, you addressed it very well, might be worth reviewing. What is the risk?
Yeah, our risk is that we have to make some assumptions, and the key assumption to this is what land values will go up in the district, and it's not just the value of your house or the average house, because we also have new construction, which is, I feel like this is about the 3rd time I've said this, but for new listeners, if you have a vacant lot that might be worth $30,000, that might increase 2% a year, maybe 2.5%. When you put a house on it, then all of a sudden that $33,000 vacant lot becomes worth $160,000. So between the two, new construction and just general inflation on what's already out there, we're assuming 4% a year. And that's if it came in way under that, I guess that would really push down our capital outlay levy. We kind of ran scenarios, and we actually took the most conservative of the 3, Doug and I, looking at them.
Thanks, Todd.
Sure.
There's This is a completely different question, but the land out by McGovern that we had thought about putting an elementary school there, what's the plan for that? What?
It was elementary in 2024, right?
But
We didn't address the location for the elementary in 2024. We said that was far enough out that you could, again, have the benefit of a few more years under your belt to determine where exactly that elementary would go.
Okay.
Residential growth.
You're exactly right. When you think of what resources do we have? We have a good amount of land out there. And I think it was originally purchased to have a middle school and an elementary school at that site.
Yeah.
So if that makes sense for us as part of this project, then you've got a ready-made site for an elementary school. If you want it in a site other than that particular site, you don't lose the resource, you just don't use it this time around.
I think the one thing, and I know I talked briefly to Dr. Maher about this, as we look at our middle schools, so we have George McGovern, that's newer, we have Memorial, that's newer, bigger, we'll have a newer one, or we'll have a new one on the east side, and then eventually we'll have Whittier, that's new as well. We then end up with Patrick and Edison as kind of the older buildings that are a little bit smaller, and having just attended a end of the year show choir concert in Edison, that auditorium is teeny tiny for the number of students and who are participating in activities. And so I get we have land constraints, but I would love, for a future task force to think about, we talked about parity and equity and things like that. And so as we look at our newer buildings that we'll be so lucky to have, I think looking back at some of those other buildings that are going to be older 10 years from now, they're going to, hopefully we'll relieve some of the pressure from enrollment in those, and maybe those that will change. But I would love to have us go back and look at some of those things for those activities that students are participating in, so that we can make sure they're all having a great experience and an equitable experience in those buildings too, especially when now we'll have 4 out of our 6 middle schools that will be large and great buildings. So yeah. I love Edison, so I don't want anything to happen to that. Patrick, I know they're great schools, and again, they're not near as old as a Whittier or something like that, so they're still great in great shape. But as we look at number of students and people participating, just something to consider for future groups too.
I have a question, and I think you mentioned this about Millard and Omaha, that now they're not growing, they're just looking at replacing because their boundaries have pretty much kept them. Have we ever come up with a number of prediction, or was Mike Cooper? What year is, I missed that number.
I thought about referencing the Millard experience, and maybe I'll try to put all that together. It was at the very first meeting, and I know you had an emergency.
I watched that video, but I meant, yeah.
It was and Mike Cooper talked about 40 years from now we would grow by another so many students.
Approximately.
I remember that. I remember thinking that our cap was going to be under 30,000 students.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was upper 20s, but I don't remember the exact number, and that was over the next 40 years. Mm-hmm. So we're not built out yet as a school district, but we're getting closer. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with Dr. Jim Sutphin, and he's the superintendent of Millard, which is suburban Omaha. And when I was growing up in Nebraska, Millard was just incredibly fast-growing school district that couldn't build buildings fast enough. And I talked to him in February, and I asked him if they were still growing. He said no. As a matter of fact, their focus has gone from building buildings to taking care of buildings. And I think we're in that transition where we've got to do both. We've still got to build buildings because we've still got enrollment growth, but we've also got buildings that we're going to need to take care of for a good long time. So I think that, to me, there's really 4 components to this recommendation. It's a new high school, a new middle school, a new middle school, new high school, new middle school, new elementary school, and a lot of tender loving care make up that last $40 million. We talk equity, we talk parity, we talk all those things, but it's to make sure we use those resources that are the brick and mortar that we already have, and how do we make sure we continue to take care of them so that we can have the Edisons and the Patricks serve us for years and years and years to come. So we're getting, I think we're not to where Millard is yet, to where we're completely grown out as a school district, but we're a lot closer now than we were the last time this happened.
Mike Cooper said the year 2040 was his projection when the land area would all be developed.
Okay, so I said 40 more years, but it's the year 2040.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Good note taking.
We'll bring this document to you Monday night for formal acceptance. So if you have questions, I think you can direct those questions to me or to the task force members, and or to Joe. I'll make sure that any questions that are appropriate for Joe Donovan get to him. I just want to make sure that that document helps guide your work over the next month, certainly longer than that, but there's a lot to be done over the next month, and you'll probably have more questions when you leave this meeting than you actually have sitting here right now, and you have a chance to digest. And I also know this information isn't new to all of you, as you've been very involved as observers all the way.
So if we run through really quick kind of the timeline, so like you said, we meet again on Monday, obviously.
Correct.
Then we have a work session June 27th.
You have a regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting on June 11th. You have a regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting on Monday night, June 25th. You then have another work session on Wednesday, June 27th. You then have a regularly...
I'll just interrupt. The reason for that is because otherwise it'd be July 4th, and so that's why we moved it back a week.
Yep. You then have a regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting on July 9th, and you have a regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting on July 23rd. So you have 4 regularly scheduled board meetings, and you have 1 work session. I would recommend to you that if you need more time, there's time between July 9th and July 23rd for another work session too. I know you get very busy at that time with personal vacations and things like that, simply because you don't get much time other than that. So there is time here to do it all yet.
And then the time you said we would have to approve to have a vote in September by which date? July
23rd.
If you want to have a bond referendum on September 18th, you'll have to declare that the scope of that project no later than July 23rd.
Okay. So then can you walk us through, let's hypothetically, it's July 23rd, we've agreed based on all the research and the participation and the engagement. What happens between July 23rd and September 18th?
Really, at that point, it's community engagement. I would say from a school district perspective, we can do a lot of community education on facts, on figures, on detail and scope of the project. We can't do anything to advocate for or advocate against any campaign, including a campaign for a school bond referendum. But we can provide a whole lot of information and a lot of detail. I've heard word that there might be a community group separate from the school district that would also advocate for a bond issue. That would be separate than what we do as a school district.
And so do you see that as public meetings being held here where people could come ask questions and information could be presented? Do you see, what is your vision or what is your history of how that has looked in other situations?
I can tell you in my previous position, I ate a lot of rubber chicken for a couple of months, a lot of civic groups, a lot of conversations with folks out in the community, a lot of conversations with PTOs, PTAs, a lot of conversations with booster clubs. And truly, anybody that wants the information will have an opportunity to present. I talked this morning to all of our general administration team about putting together a group of speakers, whether it be members of the board, myself, other members of IPC, to be able to come out and talk about the facts that would be behind the bond issue.
Thank you.
From a purely public, outside of our scope of what we were doing here, I know I was approached by some chamber members, and one may even be a board of the chamber who they're interested in learning more about growing enrollment and how we plan to address that in terms of the facilities. And they're interested in continuing that conversation and want to know more information and what they can do to get the word out as well.
Sure. So after that decision is made on potentially July 23rd, if there were community groups that were interested in inviting somebody to come, they would just contact like a Deanne or somebody to make those types of arrangements?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
And we would reach out to and let folks know we're available,
Sure.
you know, to the Kiwanis, to the Rotaries, to the Optimists, to any of those civic groups that might be interested in the information.
Sure.
We'd be
They're
happy.
interested.
We do that. That is a regular beginning of the school year round for me, anyway. So it's not uncommon for folks to reach out and say, would you please come talk to us about the state of the schools
Sure.
as we enter into a new school year. This year, I'll just have maybe a more interesting topic.
Okay. Thank you.
And I say me, but there are a lot of folks that would be able to speak to this. This isn't just on my availability.
The bond election, if we go forward, would that be like a school board, like a separate school board one that we would run, and then at school locations probably? And how?
Yes, I might ask Mr. Veek if he has anything to add to that, but the easy answer to your question is yes.
Yeah, our standalones, we usually have like 15 or 16 sites. They're kind of in the 4 quadrants of the city. They're basically broke up that way. And you can show up at any one of them and vote there. You don't have to go to a particular one.
What's the cost of that?
It's like $40,000, something like that.
But what's nice with those precincts is that, like you said, you can go to any of them and vote at, so if one's closer to your work, and so hopefully we'll be able to get out the vote that way. Okay. Anybody, anything else?
Just thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kate did a really good job of thanking the task force for their work at the final meeting. I just want to make sure that I put in my 2 cents worth on that. I know how much work many of you did, and Theron's work in gathering data was yeoman's work and is certainly appreciated by the board. And Vernon, we do know how to get a hold of you when it comes time for those boundary discussions. Thank you.
You know, to the staff, that's incredible. That I'm glad that you mentioned that, but everybody went to a lot of work, and we have a lot of information that we get to decide on and appreciate what everybody put together for us.
You know, this is slightly off topic, but Cynthia and I both serve on the Public Schools Education Foundation as well. I just want to take a moment to also compliment your staff in HR. Becky Dorman is amazing, and we're very close to hiring that executive director position that we've talked to before about, and you have an incredible employee there as well. So beyond the facilities task force, know that you have good people working for you.
We are very lucky, that's for sure. Okay. Well, thank you, all of you, for being here, and you can go about your day or stay if you like. We have committee assignment reports to go through next.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Oh. What was that?
Increase in equity since
Oh.
1956 has been an average of 4%.
We do have the survey instrument.
That would be good.
So
Okay.
if you are on the low end, right?
Yeah.
Talk about now?
Is that what you guys
Okay.
came up with?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can do it.
Okay.
Yep.
A quick
Sorry, I didn't realize that was, or do you want us to,
Yeah.
I'll have copies.
Yeah, I'll get you one and I'll hand you the rest. So Ms. Parker is handing out an updated draft of the community survey. And Dr. Maher mentioned the survey will open on the 11th. It'll run to the 24th. And I thought that I might give you a quick overview and just run through the survey very quickly. The community survey it's something that my folks and I in my shop do a lot. And I'll say there's two reasons, I think, to do a community survey. First of all, it really continues the conversation in the community. It's kind of a natural next step in this. Again, engagement sessions, task force. We're kind of going down that funnel where now we can go to the community and we can ask for feedback. I will tell you that in my experience, if you go to the community and if you hand someone on a street, you know, a 1,500-word document and say, read this, it has everything that you need to know and understand about the district's needs, the process, and possible solutions to address those needs, they'll say thank you, and it'll go in the next recycling bin. If you provide people with a survey, people will spend 15, 20 minutes and they'll go through, and they'll really read for meaning and provide you with some good information. The second reason for the survey, of course, is that you're provided with just really great information. So with that, the survey plan that we have is that this would be done primarily online. Community members would receive a postcard. In that postcard, it would include a URL where community members can go and take the survey. Those who choose would prefer a paper version of the survey can request that, and that can be provided to them as well. I'm quick to note that the survey is based on it's a convenience sample. We're not doing kind of stratified polling. So again, we won't be calculating error, we won't be running regression analysis, but I'll tell you, in my experience, the information that we get back, not only is it useful for the board in terms of having good information as you're deciding whether to put something on the ballot, it also tends to really mirror the election results. With that, maybe I'll just run through this very quickly just to give you kind of an overview. Again, this is version 6. Again, I'm going to thank the district staff again. Deanne and Doug, again, have been amazing. And this is heavy lifting. A lot goes into this. This is easy for me to put together a draft, but a lot of the responsibility for this really falls on district staff. We start this with a quick letter from both the board and the task force. And then starting on the bottom of page 1, again, there would be a page break. We ask a series of demographic questions. We want to know, where people live, how long they've been in the school district, some other questions. And the reason why I find that that's important is that it's helpful to get a sense of who's taking the survey. I'll tell you, as a parent of 3 kids in the school district where my wife and kids and I live, I would take every survey that comes in. Parents tend to be kind of overrepresented in these surveys, right, because you're closest to the school district. However, we also know that 70% or more of the people who end up voting on election day tend not to have children in the district. So it's important for us to be able to disaggregate the data and get a sense of how those people make sense of the world as it relates to our survey. So you're going to see we ask a series of questions. Where do you reside? How long have you lived in the school district? Question number 4 is a sorter question. It allows us to get a better sense of who people are. Question number 5 allows people to check from a list where their children go to school.
Can I have a question about that?
Sure.
So this is like the odd time of year where people are transitioning from one school to another.
That's a really good
people
question.
are always like, do I have a 4th, or do I have a 5th grader, or
That's a
do I
really
have a
good
6th
question.
grader? So maybe including something like in the fall of 2018.
That's a great point.
Where
Yep.
will your students
Thank you
attend?
for that. I agree. Yep.
And I would add that because in number 4, we ask if you're currently a student at Sioux Falls School District,
Ah.
then maybe number 5 just needs to be reworded to
Yep.
include, children or you.
That's a really great
attend.
point. Thank you for that. Yeah, and a recognition that we're at the end of the school year is behind us, right?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. Number 6, we ask a series of communication, a communication question. We find that this is just really important. Where do you get information about the district? And I have been doing school communications for a better part of 2 decades, and I'll tell you, I always learn something from seeing a lot of these results. The 2 groups of people who are really hard to get a hold of, I say 2 people that I'm close with. My mom, my 85-year-old mother, really hard to connect with her. And so it's important to get a sense of how seniors are receiving information. The other person is my 30-year-old nephew. He doesn't read a daily newspaper, at least not in the same way that he would say his ancient uncle, who still reads a paper newspaper. But so that allows us to get a sense of how people are getting information. Number 7 is just a general satisfaction question. A question that I try to ask on every survey is how would you describe the Sioux Falls School District to someone who's not familiar with it? That provides us with great information. We can disaggregate the results based on that, and I think it's helpful. Number 9 asks people how involved they've been. And then we go into the district needs. And this, again, is where the district staff have really been, have helped a great deal, and where we spend a lot of time distilling the needs down where we can fit it onto a computer screen or increasingly onto a screen of a mobile device, which is how a lot of people will take the survey. Number 10 allows us to get a sense of, after we've described the needs, whether community members believe that those needs are something that we need to act on now. And we get that from time to time, where people say, yeah, no, those are important needs, you absolutely should do something, just not now. And so it's important, I think, for us and for you to have information kind of about urgency. We do a page break, we go into the next series of questions, and we ask, absent of a solution or cost, generally speaking, whether people would support solutions to kind of some general solutions to address kind of general needs at that point. That's 11, 12, and 13. On page 6, starting with question 14, we go into process and propose solutions. And you're going to see that this dovetails with the report that you have. This really allows us to test with the community. We provide them with information, kind of distill the report, and we say, all right, not only do you think that this is a good idea, but would you pay for it? And so again, we're looking at willingness and ability to pay. And then 15 is an open response. And by the way, as it relates to open responses, we find that we can ask 3, maybe 4 open response questions if people are taking a survey. I don't know if you take a lot of surveys and you get to that point where, you know, it says, and this survey will have that, where you're 80% of the way through, and then you have a whole page of like open response questions, and you're going, oh, this is going to take me 10 minutes. That's where people drop off. And so we have to be, we can't have open response question after open response question, but I think that we've used them pretty well here. And then 7 goes into asking the question, again, that we talked about earlier about the Sanford land donation. We're asking that at the end, after we've collected the other information, and we ask it pretty directly, again, with a corresponding 17, which is an open response question. So this is the question that I often get, is this too much? This is what I would say is a medium or even light survey. My sense is that the response rate will be very good on this. And again, the idea is to open this on the 11th. We'll close on the 24th. And then I will put together a report that will look. It'll be similar to the report that you have, but it will go through and provide the board with information about the results, and we'll look for anomalies and other information, the kind of things that if I were a school board member I would want based on the data.
How is the audience chosen to send
This is everyone. Everyone, yeah, everyone is encouraged to participate.
Right, but I mean, are we going to send out an email to like parents in our district, or
Everyone's getting a postcard?
It's a postcard.
Okay.
Yeah, postcard.
Okay,
yeah.
We're not going to do an email, but it's not a postcard.
You know, and what I usually say is, do a postcard. You know, and I think of my mom. You know, my mom gets direct mail and responds to direct mail. but I say, do other things too. So,
That
and the
we can
district
provide
does.
a link.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
That's exactly right. And I should also say that we, I probably shouldn't get into it too much, but we have some ways of knowing whether we almost never see this, kind of a, stuffing of the ballot box where somebody's coming back and doing it 2 or 3 times. It almost never happens, but we have some ways that we can kind of follow that as well.
If we're not getting much response by like the 18th, do we have something to kind of like push again?
Yeah, and I think in talking with Deanna, I mean, again, Deanna does such a good job, communicating. That's something I will tell you that I'm usually worried about as I go to districts. I was at a district late last week, and I was telling them, listen, you're really going to need to push. I'm not worried about that here, considering the robust communications and efforts that you have here.
Yeah.
We're anxious to see the responses.
So we'll get the results from this.
At your next work session.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Joe.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody have any questions on the survey? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, Dr. Maher, on the
No,
facilities task force?
That's it. I'm glad we had the extended time to work our way through it. We probably have a little more time than we needed, but
It's okay.
better than being
It's
rushed.
better than being rushed, yeah. Appreciate that. Okay, well, we can move on to committee assignment reports. Todd, do you want to start?
Sports Authority, we're on the off month. PTA, have not met since
Off month.
yeah, off quarter. And then Cynthia's so gracefully agreed to help me with the insurance report, as I brought the report from September of 2017 and didn't think that you'd enjoy that. So that's all I have.
But Southeast Tech Council met, and we're moving forward with a capital campaign out there. Actually, the STI Foundation is moving forward with that, and just getting started with that. I know that that there are some administrative changes that are taking place that will be they've been announced. They'll go into effect July 1st with the administration. Enrollment, early enrollment numbers, early registration numbers are looking very positive at Southeast again. So, we're hoping that it is the beginning of a trend, but there's just a tremendous amount of work going on, and Bob Griggs and his team are doing a terrific job with making changes that needed to be made out there. The Vet Tech program, we're still working to raise some funds. We did get I think it's a $750,000 Governor's Office of Economic Development grant, but we need to raise an equal amount of money to be able to get that. So I think we have until September, end of September or something, to raise those funds. So if we get that done, we'll definitely be moving forward out there with the Vet Tech program. That's it.
We had a PATH committee, the longest meeting we've had in a long time. Spent a lot of time talking about one of the schools in Harrisburg and some transportation, road, sidewalk kind of issues and weather related. And then we talked a lot about, is this 37?
Yeah,
38. And some of the traffic issues coming with students cutting through there from Lincoln High School, cruising real quickly by Robert Frost. So you may notice that the road is, I think they call it on a diet, right? The road's on a diet out there, so they have the white reflector. So we spent a lot of time talking about, did you notice that?
I wondered why, seriously.
That's Todd and I, right there. So there's a lot of research that goes to show if they either add a bike path or they add the parking on the side, that people just naturally drive faster when the road itself or the lane narrows. And so instead of trying to add a stop sign or a yield sign or something, because they said people tend to accelerate and then slow down quick or kind of roll through stop signs. So they wanted to try this kind of diet first to see. They also talked about reflective stop signs out there. They've had, Colleen Warner came and one of the custodians came and talked a lot about some of the issues they've had with very close calls with students and staff members due to people driving very quickly through that intersection. So the first step was to try to narrow the road and try to get people to naturally slow down and do some reflective type of signage. And then worst case would be a four-way stop, I think was the next step. So very interesting discussion. There was also kind of at the end, talked about the potential of kind of morphing the PATH committee into a complete streets committee that the city is going to have. But there wasn't a lot of consensus, and we actually did meet for a really long time, and so some people had to leave. So we're going to pick that conversation up in August. I think Todd and I are on the same page, thinking that we really feel like PATH needs a committee to really talk about the important things going on regarding getting our kids to and from school safely, aside from other complete streets kinds of conversations in the city. They spend a lot of time on theirs with bikers. There's a lot of bicyclists that are on that committee, and so they talk about safe riding for that, and not that that's not valuable, but I think it's a different need than what we have for our students. And so workforce development, we have been continuing our exercises of trying to brainstorm how to engage different groups of the population. And this last meeting was interesting. We talked more about our older retired community members and how we can maybe get them back into the workforce. You know, how many do we think are interested? How many do we think would want to be paired up, and what can we do? I had some really good conversations about how can we retain people. So instead of letting them retire, maybe we let them retire, but they go down from 40 to 20 hours, and then you keep their institutional knowledge around and their experience, but you still let them participate in the workforce at a level that they want to, and maybe there's some job sharing, or maybe so just some really interesting conversations and some different ideas that people had and experiences that they had had with other larger communities of things that they had done to try to kind of slowly transition them out versus just cut the cord and have that be done. So lots of good conversations with that committee still as well. And then policy just met yesterday, and there will be a handful of policies for both review, revise, and first reading for Monday night for discussion. And I will not be here on Monday night. I will be out of town, so that will be Kate's job.
So will I. I will also be gone.
The other three of you need to be healthy.
Okay.
I think I'll be here.
I'll be here. And the policies, you'll see just, a lot of them are in reaction to legislative changes. So we're just trying to get them in and get those updated where necessary, so. Yeah.
That's all I have. We're into our short summer with our new calendar, so we haven't met on that committee.
Summer's so short this year. Sorry, Cynthia?
No, thanks. Okay, affordable housing met May 16th, and we had a speaker from the South Dakota Housing Development Authority and kind of went over what happened in the Sioux Falls area for fiscal year 2017. They did $315 million for 2,273 people of dollars for affordable housing, $21 million for assistance in loans for purchase for first-time home buyers. They did 3 workforce housing projects, 1 tax credit project, and 3 affordable housing projects. So it was a busy year for 2017 for the affordable housing. Sioux Falls Education Foundation met yesterday, and as Vernon mentioned, an offer has been extended. We had 40 applicants for that position, so they were very, like their 5, they narrowed down, very happy, and they said they could have probably met with another 5, I mean, that were of good quality. So we're waiting for that to work out. Let's see, August 9th, I believe it is. Yes, August 9th at 7:30 at the Downtown Holiday Inn will be the breakfast that they have every year that Dr. Maher will be at. Let's see. And we have been working a bit with the Barrel House to see about, they have a fundraiser, so we might be partnering with them, but we're still working out some details on that. And the teacher swap meet is set for Friday, July 27th at the Convention Center. And then finally, insurance. We had a great meeting, brought in the final renewal, which was for the stop loss, and we actually got a premium decrease. So it's about $118,000 less for this year. And we only have to sign a 1-year contract. In the past, we had a 3-year with them. And we're also getting, is it a $319,000, I think, dividend for our great claims over the last 3 years. So looking at us, so that was great news. Grand rounds, we have about 73% participation, and the people who participated in that, I believe, got a premium holiday for me. So that was great that they signed up. And we had a great, somebody actually in the meeting had used it for something and had a great experience with it. Yeah, so they're very happy with it. So, and we're off until September. So.
Okay.
We didn't want September's minutes.
It was fascinating last year, but that premium vacation is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody knows how great we're doing health-wise, and having a full premium vacation is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. I think I just have Head Start. We had our last meeting of the year a couple weeks ago. Pretty brief meeting at the downtown library, and then they usually do like an event for the families and the kids. So they had an activity for them that day. But I don't want to steal Val's thunder because I know she'll be reporting out to us at the end of the month. But two good news, pieces of good news are Focus Area 2 Federal Monitoring Review. The Denver Regional Office was here in March for about a week, I think. And we got that review back, and that came back positive. So that was no deficiencies, no areas of non-compliance or concern. So that's really good news. And then our class observation report, which is CLASS is the classroom assessment scoring system. And we were scored at or above national average in all areas. So that's another piece of good news. So like I said, I know Val will be coming back to report on that a little bit more thoroughly, but wanted to share that because that's a lot of work for staff and stressful time when any federal reviewers are in town. So they did a great job. So, and then Chamber, we had our sort of the strategic planning meeting a couple weeks ago. I wasn't there for the full meeting, but it seems like the Chamber's doing some good stuff. So I think that's all I have. Okay. All right. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn? So moved. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.